Good morning, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Sultans of Security Podcast. Again, I'm Sean Dennis, and always with me is my angelic friend, Shane Morose.
I'm Shane Morose. Yes. What's going on?
Not much. Today's episode is we briefly touched on it in episode 1. But we Shane and I have quite a bit. Shane has a little bit more. He's been a little bit more roles with it, but quite a bit of background in maritime security. So today's episode is going to be about that. So Shane's going to start us off and kind of trying to help educate everybody what maritime security is, and then we're going to talk about what that looks like around Baltimore and the work that we did and he continues to be part of today.
Yeah, so maritime security, it's one of those things. I'm just trying to give a synopsis of 20 plus years of time in a few seconds or a few minutes here. But when you look at pre 9/11 and post 9/11, that's where you see the big shift in the paradigm of what the federal government thought was important, necessary, and what kind of federal agencies you had out there. Prior to 9/11, of course, you had immigration that was contending with folks that were trying to enter the country for work visas or move here permanently. You had Customs, Border Patrol. But after 9/11, one of the key shifts was the development of CBP as we know it today, and also TSA, Transportation Security Agency. So you primarily see those at the airport. But along with that, they had a realization that how do we know who's coming into these ports? How are we going to control, and how are we going to know that the folks that are entering our ports are certified, they're okay to do so, quote unquote. So that's where you had a few years later the development of the TWIC program, or the Transportation Workers Identification Credential. And it's a universal ID that TSA issues, and the Coast Guard actually enforces laws on. And that permits someone to enter a secure restricted area, which is a certain area that's seen by the Coast Guard and approved by the Coast Guard, I should say, that every port manages and determines, where do they want to have the most security, where do they want to control the access. And so our role, or I should say my role in maritime security, developed while I was on the police department, while this was all going on, again, just a year after 9/11. So we're talking about 2002. I got involved with a security company called Beta Marine, which is owned and operated by one of my former coworkers in the police department. And my very first job with that was watching a crew member, I should say not a crew member, but a sonner or a stowaway on a vessel. And I had to transport him back to the Dominican Republic. So we took private flights, chartered flights from Baltimore to Philadelphia, and then from Philadelphia back to the Dominican. And I just turned him over to the authorities there, and that was my first delving into maritime security. And over the years, it's evolved to where either the Coast Guard or Customs will see that a vessel's coming into the U.S., and they'll say, okay, this ship visited certain ports around the world. Their security programs are lax, or they're not as stringent as the U.S. And so they'll say, okay, because of that, we're going to require extra security on this. And that's where Beta Marine gets involved. Customs can also require this as well, depending on the number of crew members who are allowed to actually enter. Without getting into too much detail, that's when you talk about crew members who have visas, who are allowed to disembark and go shopping, go to the mall, visit family, that sort of thing. So if a large majority of that crew can't get off the vessel, sometimes they determine that, well, we can't have the ship's crew controlling who goes and who can't go if none of them are allowed to get off. So that's, again, where we get involved in controlling that access on and off the ships. And again, it's over the years, it's evolved even more to where we're providing facility security. So we're controlling access into and out of the entrances by land. And again, that's it in a nutshell what we do. It's interesting work because you get to see a lot of different people from around the world communicate how things are going in their neck of the woods, so to speak. The different cargoes that come and go, some of the more mundane things like your woods, your metals. But then one of the most interesting ones is cattle. There was a huge demand for cattle being exported from the Port of Wilmington to different countries. And so you get to see thousands of cows just being loaded onto ships and transported overseas. So But yeah, that's what I do now. Managing that company over the years, after I got some experience behind it, but also getting more intricate details about how things operate in terms of the grants that are offered, and that's where my role with a different terminal was for about a year and a half. And you get to see how these things transpire at the federal level, and how people get their funding, and how the programs develop. One of the more interesting ones was a U.S. Coast Guard member who was doing an internship. And you think of an intern, you think of someone, a kid fresh out of college or fresh out of high school, trying to learn the ropes. But this was a gentleman who was about my age, a family man, a captain in the Coast Guard, and excuse me, not a captain, a full lieutenant. And he was trying to learn how the industrial side of things, the private sector side of things, so that in the future, when laws are being passed or trying to be passed in Congress or wherever in Washington, that they had that industrial point of view of, well, we think that this is how it should work from the government side, but is that really how it's going to work in practice, in actual, he said practice. So good time. He was there for 2 months, learned a lot about the insides of what the Coast Guard is looking for when they're doing their inspections. And again, meet a lot of different contacts and people around the world. So it's been interesting. And then on top of that, I was doing law enforcement as well. So yes. But
yeah, so one of the interesting things I think getting involved working with you doing that is just a lot of I don't know how many times, working, 2:30 to 10:30 shift, or even some of the 10:30 to 6:30 in the morning, not thinking about how much cargo is moving around the world at those hours of the day, especially here for that time here, but across the pond, as they say, it's daylight, so stuff's moving. And so, being around people, and we're checking the apps, like waiting for ships to come in, at 3:30 in the morning, the boat's already supposed to be there, supposed to be docked, so they're already supposed to be starting work. We got people chomping at the bit to get started, and we're just waiting, but like, just not thinking about that. I mean, I remember the one detail you called me for, that wood ship. It was just you and I on this ship, and I backed down to the end of the pier, and you're on the side of the pier. Met you at 3:00 in the morning, and I was just like, I told people, I was like, what if I was going to mob or something, like going to, pulling up to a gate into a shipyard, waiting to receive cargo.
Right.
It was.
We got our lumber off the back of a truck.
Yeah, right. So it was just. It was very interesting. And when you said the cattle ship, I remember I got to work one of those in Philly. It was a very, very cold detail too. It was below freezing temperatures. I was on the top deck of that ship.
Oh yeah. I mean, in those ships, they can require as little as one person, but those were upwards of sometimes 10 people.
Yep.
Placed in various points around the ship. So you've got this whole perimeter of people just making sure that no one's trying to get off the ship. And that was really the purpose of it, is that you're not trying to keep the cargo from going anywhere. You're there for the crew of the ship to make sure that no one's trying to jump and abscond. And
I think for that, I think for that ship, it was because it was a handful of members of the crew were from Yemen that required that ship to have the armed guards at the bottom of the gangway, and people on the ship. I remember 4 of us on the ship, 4 on the pier, rotating off and on, like, because I had the water side at the bow of the ship.
Really?
And it was, and I was like a Carhartt ninja. I was all decked out in black. You can only see my eyes. Hard hat on, which saved my head, because it was like a maze trying to get through there, because people just say you're up on that post, but never been on a ship like that before. I'm like, how the hell do I get to where I'm supposed to be going? I'm supposed to be relieving somebody. And by the time I got there, the person I was supposed to relieve had already come down, because it was time for them to get off. And so they didn't wait for me, but they knew how to get down. I'm running around. I'm running past all the stalls where these cattle are going to be. About knocked myself out if it hadn't been for the hard hat. But then I finally made it up there, and I was just like, now what am I supposed to do? Just stand there and watching the water, the rhythmic sounds of the water cold water hitting the side of the ship, and the crane bringing the big pallets from the pier under the top deck of all the supplies for the animals, and then the big pump, the big pump machine bringing all of the, I think it was the sawdust and stuff for the pens.
Right. And you think of all the logistics that goes into that. Of we can't just put these cows on and then they're in stasis for 2 weeks while they go overseas. No, they got to be fed. They got to be watered. They got to be bedding. They're going to make a mess, and someone's got to clean it up.
Yeah, I wonder. I'm going to go on that stuff gets thrown overboard. But I mean, it was like you're talking about logistics. So that shift ended early because they just finished loading the ship because somebody forgot to logistically work out with the USDA to be there to inspect the ship before they could start loading the cattle after they were getting the supplies on. And so it's supposed to be a 12-hour ship, got cut to 8 hours. And so, here I am 3 o'clock in the morning driving back from that port back home to Baltimore, so.
Fortunately, it was a good time to drive. Traffic-wise.
Well, yeah. I got home pretty quickly, so. But but it's interesting. Like I said, all the different products, you don't think about, they get imported, and then you think about your situations where we're exporting product. Like, well, why are we exporting that? But you hear on the news, we need this stuff. But why are we why are we exporting it?
Right. Yeah. Road salt is one. You're like, why do we need to import road salt from other countries? Aren't there enough salt flats out in Utah, et cetera? But in my opinion, I think it comes down to cost. It's probably less expensive to ship that stuff in from another country, bring it here and store it and use it when you need it. So, and
where the CSX facility where we brought that when it was the urea was coming in from South America, the dried pig urine pellets for fertilizer. I'm like, we don't have enough pig farms in the United States. We can't capture the urine here, and we can't make our own. Serious, But yeah,
just cattle. I mean, just exporting cattle. I mean, there's enough land in and around Asia and Russia or wherever that they've got land. Can they not have cattle farms out there? But I guess they don't know how to raise them. I'm not really sure. But
I don't. It's a lot to think about, and then I guess everything with COVID really, I think, put another spotlight on the ports as well, with supply chain issues. Like with the strikes, not having enough people at the port of Los Angeles. You had truckers waiting to have their pick up containers or have containers offloaded off their trucks, but not enough workers at the pier to do it, to work all the shifts that were needed to address it because of labor regulations and things like that, just not having enough staff.
Right. And that's the thing is that through all COVID, I mean, everyone who worked the piers, worked the docks, the stevedores, the security, the loadmaster, it was all critical infrastructure. It was essential. There was no, none of those folks got, were able to stay at home or could stay home because they needed to work and, keep that supply chain going. So, but I think it still ripples today, with pricing, and there's been a shift in, what was it, out west, I think it was, where they had a real issue with supply chain. So some of those vessels that were supposed to go to those ports on the west coast of the U.S. found that they could come to the east coast and get delivered much quicker and offload a lot faster as well. So, just a personal experience. I had ordered something, it was a game for one of the kids, and it kept saying delay, delay, delay. And we contact the company, and they said, "Oh, the ship there, it's just sitting out in the harbor in the Pacific, outside of, I think it was California, just waiting to come in. So your kid's name will be there. It just has to get here into the country first." So it kind of gives you that perspective of, wow, you get to see it firsthand.
Right. And then just when things happen, I think when I was still there in Maryland, there was that outside the port, near the port of Savannah, there was that car ship that rolled over.
Oh, the railroad ships.
Yeah, like there was that. So there was that one that had cars that was, the next stop was supposed to be Baltimore, coming, I think, but rolled over and lost all those cars outside the port of Savannah for whatever reason. So like,
Yeah.
and then so there was, there was all the fuel in the water from the ship and everything like that. They supposed a whole port, and so like how that impacts things. So it's good that like what you were to your point, that those ports on the West Coast didn't have enough people to do it, but then if the ships can get around the East Coast, they can offload it. And then there's the logistics of then getting the product back to where it was going to go. But it was supposed to be product that was more designed to be on the West Coast, or how they,
Right.
like how changing the distribution routes in order to get product out there.
Oh yeah, and just for those who are listening that may not be familiar with it, we use some terms sometimes. You're like, what did you say? What's that acronym or whatever? RO is roll on, roll off. So that's where you have items like cars, farm equipment that's driven on, and then someone drives them off when they get to their destination. So they short not to call it RO. So, but I mean that's another key of you see vehicles being imported, exported. I've never really experienced vehicles being exported from the U.S. As so much as they're being imported here. Some high end, some regular production models of cars, but there's a whole industry there. I mean, there's a whole side of things where a unionization. You just don't hire folks off the street to drive these things because they've got to ensure they have licenses. That TWIC I was kind of found, but it's just amazing that's the complexity and the depth of everything that goes on to get things where they need to go. And so to be a part of that when this perfunctory level of security is really amazing because invariably someone who starts working is like, this is really neat, to see how this stuff happens. So, and I think it kind of largely goes glossed over by a lot of folks because, they see that they need a bottle of ketchup or they need some fruit, and it's in the store. And that's where it came from, the store. But you know, there's some vessels they'll transport thousands and thousands of gallons of juice on a ship, and it gets brought here and bottled and then put in the stores. So it's really amazing stuff.
I think too, it was right when President Trump was elected, and he was talking about putting all those tariffs on countries and stuff for importing goods. And I remember that all of that talk, you see it trickling down to at the ports as well, because there was all that influx at Trade Point there of them bringing all of that titanium and all those other metals in, where they had to set up that separate lot to put all that stuff because they had so much coming in. The aluminum and the aluminum and titanium, that like the titanium blocks, the aluminum rods, the big poles that were bringing in, and how much they were bringing in order to have in by the first of the year before the tariffs kicked in. And like and having to pivot to add more security because the millions of dollars of goods sitting there out in the open that logistically would be really hard to steal and do anything with.
It would be, yeah. You can't go in there with your pickup truck and just pick up a block of titanium or even aluminum, but still. Or not only that, but even if you got it, offloading it legally would be hard.
Well,
a lot of these aluminum dealers, aluminum yards are told not to accept those types of, someone comes there with a block of aluminum the size of a refrigerator. They're told, no, you can't take that because chances are it's probably not legal.
Right. And then how much this product is worth, there's those 2 blocks of titanium that slid off and fell in the water between the ship and the pier. And the salvage, the diving salvage crew they had to bring in to get those off the bottom, by the pier right there, which was no small feat of money, resources and time and just, an interesting operation to retrieve those. But it speaks to, the importance of the ports and how much, money they're bringing in and things, that because according to research, there's 926 ports in the United States, and they account for, I think last year it was 4.6 trillion in economic activity, which is equivalent to 26% of the U.S. economy. So 1/4 of the U.S. economy comes through the ports.
Right.
And there's 20 big container ports in the United States, roughly about 10 per coast. That's where all the big container ships, not all the other, the other ports that we're bringing in different products like coal or like, they're at Trade Point bringing in corn and soybeans and exporting metal, scrap metal.
Right.
like those things, and bringing on all the stuff for all these other, like you said, I think CSX, I think was probably the most diverse amount of product coming in, I think, between the iron ore, the salt, the urea, bringing in coal, sending out coal, and just the process of how it came in, watching it come in the train cars, the coal being dumped out of the train cars through the system, all the chute and conveyor belt system to get it, and then unload it onto barges and ships. Just it's crazy, like how much of an industry there is, and like what that looked like prior to like the Industrial Revolution. Like trying to imagine bringing the stuff and trying to move the stuff. But like I said, it's very interesting. Like the details of it, it's a good thing that, I mean, because we would be crippled. The country would be crippled if they don't have a lot of the stuff coming in. Again, 26% of the U.S. economy is through the ports.
Right.
So
unless it's made here, it has to come here. And how do you get here? Ship, train, airplane. Yes, you can drive something up from Argentina or something all the way to the U.S., but the logistics of that, or when you think about transporting large bulk items or huge volumes of things, the vessel right now is the way to go. Unless we got Zelensky's shrinking machine from Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, we got to get this stuff in huge ships to come here and become, if it's a raw product, it gets refined and becomes something usable. Sugar is another one. In the Port of Baltimore, Domino Sugar imports that. Cocoa beans. So as another thing, Hershey's chocolate gets their beans from somewhere else. So it's you can see that on the tour every time you go to Chocolate World. This seems like they update it every time I go, but yeah. So, but from the security standpoint, though, port security became, because of 9/11, became very important. I think the realization was that we're controlling now how the airways. After they realized what happened with the airplanes and the training that was undertaken and how that was used against us. So the next logical step is, all right, how else can we get in this country? Like I said, you can come by vessel. So, it's not just about controlling who comes in to the facilities. It's also making sure, again, that the folks that are exiting these vessels to go ashore can do so, and that everyone who's coming in is here for a legitimate purpose. So, unfortunately, though, sometimes things slip through the cracks. We get some absconders who they're here, they come legally, and they just never return to the vessel, and now they're here. But fortunately, I think those primarily have come about because of folks who just want to come here to live here and be here, not to do something to us.
And then wasn't there some stowaways on one of those railroad ships that came into? Wasn't it up in Delaware that you had that Beta worked with?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember that one myself, all the details with that. But there was one. There was a railroad ship like that. Now I can't remember all the details of that one, but I can recall a vessel we had in Delaware to where, I guess it's just because the hallmark of our level of security expertise and just presence, that while the ship was docked, no one got off. But as soon as it left and was in the middle of the Delaware River, one of the crew just jumped into the water. Now, fortunately, it was in the middle of summertime, so but it was quickly found and discovered, and he was scooped up. But it was just like someone really wanted to get in here, so they thought it was wise enough to try to jump off of the ship into the Delaware River, which the current of that is crazy. You can jumping into any kind of body of water from a large vessel like that, you take your life in your hand just to impact it alone. But the current of that. But
well, that was my philosophy. Sorry, go ahead.
No. That's what I was going to say.
I would say that was my philosophy working that cattle ship because of the cold temperatures, and I'm sure how sub-freezing the water was. That if one of those crew members wanted to jump off that ship and try to swim through that water to get to another part of land, because I was believing that they did not have open water scuba diving training. They didn't have open water gear or the dry suits to keep them warm and everything to be able to, get off the ship and get to land without freezing to death, more than likely. Because like I said, I think at the time we were up there, midnight, it was like 20 degrees, but the wind chill was below zero and the wind was coming off the water. So I was just like,
I think, I mean, that's just it seasonally, and I think it's to our benefit when we have cold weather because you're less likely to have those that are going to try to do that because again, you don't have those types of gears. But when you get fair weather, warm weather, summertime, you can run those instances that so if they have the opportunity, they will discard. If someone really wants to do that, but we have good relationships with the U.S. Customs, with the Coast Guard, and in the Port of Baltimore for what we do, and it's like I said, it's been an interest. I wouldn't change anything for that because again, the police department, it was a wealth of knowledge to learn there about law enforcement and interacting with folks and the laws and holding them and enforcing them, but also community relations aspects. But this was like this kind of like, hey, we need someone to take someone to back home because they're on the ship and who can do it. And I just kind of overheard the conversation and I said, I have a passport. What are you trying to do here? And that's how I got started with it. And 20 plus years later, I'm still working with it, and it's but again, wouldn't change anything.
Like I said, and it's brought me some interesting experiences too. Sitting with crew members in injured crew members in a hotel, watching them until they are set to be escorted to the airport to fly back home. Right. Guy with some broken ribs. It really probably wasn't a threat, but I mean, it's what was required. Right. Escorting the female crew member off of that Turkish vessel to the hospital because she bruised her sternum when she landed on the fire hose when they were watching the top deck. So that was an interesting experience. Taking somebody going to an American hospital, you got to protect them because they're a foreign national. Somebody in the waiting room hears them start talking with an accent. All heck could break loose. And you're responsible for their safety and getting them back to the ship, and then getting them back in the ship on time because the ship's waiting for them to get back so that the ship can leave. The ship's done what they're supposed to do, right. But what do we do here?
Or sometimes they say, all right, you're not going to be in a hospital for another week. We're sailing, and the company will find a way to get you either back to us or home.
Yeah.
So, but unless we forget, you are an action star in a commercial for a device that is used in the ports. So, if you're ever looking to see Sean Dennis in action, securing the ports, you can check out the Magnar website, Magnar, and see an awesome commercial starring Sean Dennis.
Yeah, and that was too. But and that was cool. It was cool to be part of that. Trying to pilot products to improve the technology there. Because again, a lot of these locations are not thoroughly remote, but they don't have a lot of infrastructure. There's no hard cabling for phone and power, and so it's finding those ways so that information, as they say, is power, especially information in real time, and having these those devices and in testing them to get the bugs worked out. I mean, you're working in a harsh environment, so you got to make sure they're going to work.
Right, in all weather and conditions. Yeah, right.
And they're applicable. They're not going to make the process more cumbersome. The whole thing is because, as there are a lot of people in a hurry, especially those over the road truckers. They want to get in, get their stuff loaded, and get on the road so they can go make the delivery because for them, again, it's one of those the old adage, time is money situations.
Yeah, I was just in the back of my mind, just the old adage, time is money. That's it. Some of these stevedores have done studies and research or looking at counting how long it takes for each person to be signed in by security. And then they say, okay, if it takes 5 minutes to sign each person and we've got 10 people, that's 50 minutes. And it's like, all right, multiply that times the number of days the ship is here. And then so they look at, all right, now because of signing in for security, it took an extra, I'm just being generic here, but it took an extra 5 hours over the course of the week or something like that. that's time lost that we could have been getting product off the ship. So, we feel the pressure to make sure that we're doing things expeditiously, but also in a way that it's not overlooking something too. So,
Right. I mean, I had my fair share of getting threatened by people that were running jobs because I had to close the lock. I had to lock the gates on this one because I was asked to go over to the next section of the pier because the pier was subdivided, and there was a totally different group working that gate. And then they had a vendor going to the ship, and we didn't have a guard there, so I needed to go over and unlock the gate, let that person in, and lock the gate back up. Then make a mad dash to get back over to the gate I was at to get it back open because otherwise this guy was going to be all up a butt because trucks can't come through for loading and unloading. So luckily I was pretty good at my job and I was able to make it there and like action hero style drive past the truck that was coming to come to the gate. And I got to the gate in enough time. But, it's like what we talked about the last podcast is just trying to be relatable to people, like explain to the people, have the conversation with them is like, hey, you got your job. I understand it. This is my job. And if we don't do our job and we don't do our job correctly, guess what? You're not going to be able to do your job because your stuff's going to be shut down.
Right. Yeah,
so
if something goes really skewed or awry, they can shut down. And it doesn't matter how long someone's waiting now because nothing's taking place. There's no import export. There's no cargo ops. So and that can be costly as well. But I need to pause.
All right, we'll wrap it up for the day. So thank you for your time, everybody. It was a great episode. Not sure what the topic or the next one will be, but I'm sure it'll be just as riveting, just as fun. So again, everybody, stay safe. Thank you for your time. Again, if you want to reach out to us, you can reach us at the sospodcast76@gmail.com. That's sospodcast76@gmail.com. Until next time, stay safe, everybody.
Stay safe.